Hi, good evening. Hi, good evening.
Welcome everyone, and I'm really happy everybody is here. I see there's about 150 attendees. Maybe we'll wait 1-2 minutes to see that it's stabilized, and we'll go ahead and start. Okay, I'm start being never mind. Okay, so good evening everyone. Yeah, now you can see me. Okay, good evening everyone. I'm very excited to host this international webinar and panel. I wish to thank everyone that joined us for the session. And especially I wish to welcome our exciting panel. Thanks to the internet and the media world is becoming so close, it's amazing that we are learning how similar we are. Maybe we talk different languages, but we are the same. And it's really the internet that makes us understand how the same all of us are. Sadly, what brings us together is the political situation which we are facing. We have a common enemy. It's called populism. On January 4th, the newly elected Israeli Justice Minister, Yariv Levin, announced his plan for the judicial overhaul, which was no less than a total parliamentary revolution. if passed, it would make Israel actually a dictatorship. That's something that we in Israel could not accept, and we started with this protest all over. It was no surprise that later we found out that political delegates from the ruling party actually traveled to both Poland and Hungary to study, to learn to the current regime in both two of those countries, and actually learn from them how to do it correctly, how to do this coup. And I don't have another word, it's a coup, actually, maybe with the masquerade of legal changes, but it's like, it's no different than a military coup, for my opinion. When you understand this, it's no surprise that the populist regime started by changing or dismantling the Supreme Court. It happened everywhere. In each country, they made up a different reason why they are destroying the Supreme Court. But the action was the same, because that's the way to change the system, so there won't be check and balances and the government will control everything. So we find ourselves in this populist front in Israel, in Poland, Hungary, Turkey, all over the world. And we've seen we are facing the exact same problem everywhere. So I think that if we know we are the same, if we know that we are facing the same problem, so why not join forces, learn from each other, and exchange views and experience to talk and change our way to how to act, and to maybe we can teach each other for tactics, maneuvers, what we can do against those governments. So that's basically my starting speech. But before we start, I'd like to explain the agenda of the seminar that we are starting. In the first part of the webinar, I will give each other of our guests to introduce themselves, to talk about themselves, to tell us what they have to say about the situation. Later on, we'll have 2 or 3 rounds of questions to the panel. And we follow that by a session of question and answer, where everyone that participates in this webinar can ask questions as much as they want. We are limited for 2 hours, so we'll do our best to fit in the time. So when we get to the question and answer, you'll be able to raise your hand, and that way I will decide who is going to ask the question. But before that, if you have questions during the other phases, when we just introduce ourselves and talk about the questions, so feel free to ask questions on the chat. We'll try to address each of the questions. So without further ado, let's start with the introduction. Who wants to go first from our panelists?
I can.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Krystian Kobbluk. I'm Polish-Burundian essayist and author, and also I'm human rights advisor in Tomasz Aniszko MP's office, the Green Party of Poland. Since I always speak for too long, I will be as brief as possible. If I will fail, Amir probably brutally interrupt me. So I'm really honored for the possibility to share with you my thoughts and experience about far-right government, and both liberal and leftist, and in some sense also conservative answer to it. I hope my address will help you with creating a proper, holistic, by that I mean not only political or social, but also economical or cultural, for example, answer to this threat. For me, as Polish and European, it's a little bit weird to talk about fighting right-wing nationalists to Israeli people, because in Europe, far right is always connected somehow with anti-Semitism. But I think that this situation only shows that no society is free from the danger of nationalist madness, even society which was a victim of genocide. Being neither a politician nor a political activist, though a veteran signer of petition and demonstrator, but rather an essayist who is desperately trying to find his own language, I embrace the strange position to be an outsider of some sort. I do not belong to a party, though I work with Polish Greens, as I said. I'm not in any NGO. My struggle is specific, a little bit weird even. That's why at the beginning I had problem with this. What can I say you? What can I tell you about fighting these far right governments? I accepted this invitation in a somewhat divided frame of mind. On the one hand, I cannot tell you either how to organize marches or protests, or how to run the organization.
This meeting is being recorded.
But my whole, let's say, politically aware life, I have been living in the country where right-wing populists and nationalists are in power. I have seen mechanism of this government. So I could tell you, for example, how they take over state institutions, how they violate human rights, how their propaganda changes people's mind. I also belong to minority in Poland. I could tell you about racial politics and propaganda of fear. I could explain to you why minorities are in danger, starting from LGBTQ+ people through Muslims to Blacks. I could talk for hours about the moral barge in our hearts, minds, and souls. So, long story short, I could tell you everything and nothing at the same time. But when I started to remembering what happened in Poland in the past 8 years, I was disappointed. Not because of the government's actions, but because of our reactions to it. And then it hit me. I have to tell you about all our mistakes, what we in Poland did wrong. Fundamental human rights in Israel are founded upon recognition of the value of the human being, the sanctity of human life, and the principle that all persons are free. I'm quoting the Israeli Basic Law on Human Rights and Liberty at the beginning to show you what this is all about. Do not believe that only democracy or the rule of law are at stake. In reality, we in Poland and you in Israel are fighting for human dignity and liberty. If you forget that, it will ruin this battle, because it's right-wing nationalist and populist mentality that something is bigger or more important value than human dignity and human rights. I think it's our Poles' first mistake. When the government has taken over constitutional court, we believed that it's just an unimportant political struggle. It's something which is constantly happening. But no, it was the first step to establish something which is called anocracy. So a state between democracy and autocracy. Only when this politicized constitutional court has been prohibiting abortion, we awoke, but too late. I know you're fighting bravely against plans of judiciary reform. I heard in Modin demonstrators were shouting, Yariv Levin, Israel zechlo Polin. Israel is not Poland. Yes, Israel is in Poland. Yes, you're protesting, but never forget why are you doing it. It's not about democracy only. It's about human rights and your freedom. One can believe that democracy, human rights, and freedom die because of civil war or coup d'etat or something like that. Sometimes it's like that, but not always. I'm tempted to say that right-wing populism doesn't need this kind of rebellion. It is born when people are starting to believe in all lies of populists. Okay, I will be finishing. Never forget, liberty dies with thunderous applause. And to finish my statement, I have to admit to one obsession. How things meant to be good turn into their own opposite. For example, the Great French Revolution, supposed to bring liberty, equality, and brotherhood, and ended in terror. But my position here is not strictly pessimistic. Yes, things are going wrong, but in some sense, it underground creates a new spirit. So even if you fail, don't be afraid. As Beckett puts it, try again, fail better. So at this point, I will stop. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christian. Who wants to go next? Casper, you can go.
Sure. Sorry for not being proactive in this list. It's just makes me think what was said before already. So I'd like Christian's quote very much from Star Wars. I'm a great Star Wars fan. So liberty dies with thunderous applause. And unfortunately, that's very true in Hungary as well. When last time the party was elected into power for the fourth time, there was quite an applause from its members. But as for myself, I am Gáspár Békés, and I am a Hungarian citizen and activist, I would say, and I'm the vice president of the Hungarian Atheist Society, and I have been doing this work for many years now. But I am also the president of the Association for Sustainable Democracy. So my main mission as an activist and an expert is to highlight the importance of children's rights. Most importantly, because if we don't have critically thinking children growing up in an education system and their rights are not respected, then we won't have a sustainable society, because these citizens will grow up to neglect democratic values and to neglect democratic participation, which leads afterwards to a society where only a minority will be expressing their political opinions, and that minority will most probably not express these opinions in a critical manner, which we can see in Hungary. And I'm glad that the French Revolution was mentioned, because I feel that a lot of times social change doesn't always depend on the revolution or an extreme turn of events, but also that there are a number of prerequisites that are not fulfilled necessarily. So in Hungary, the regime change of 1989 did bring a change in power structures, but didn't change fundamentally the education system or the healthcare system or the academic system. And it was comfortable for most political parties, in fact, that the education system didn't change, because less critically thinking voters ask less annoying questions. So I would say there was a status quo in Hungarian politics that we should just leave it at that, leave the Prussian model of education in force, which is a very top-down authoritarian point of view, and that would be sufficient for everyone. But that, in fact, actually made people susceptible to extremist influences. And when the economic crisis came in 2008, the Orban regime came to power, and they got 2/3 majority, and the rest is history, which we will probably talk about. But more critically thinking citizens perhaps could have stopped this at the very beginning. And I think it's very important to talk about illiberalism in the global context, because we are sure that illiberal leaders are learning from each other. So make no mistake, they are watching each other. Putin, Erdogan, Orban, these politicians are very much learning from each other and learning from historical examples of how to control power and how to oppress citizens. So the least we can do, the very least we can do, is to learn from each other. And I feel like there's a lack of learning opportunities like this one. I personally have never been to such a conference where we had so many nationalities coming together, discussing these. So at the very least, this is a really great opportunity to share our experiences and learn from each other, just as they are learning from each other. In a way, it's an intellectual arms race. So I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the discussion. I'm sure I left some aspects out, but they will certainly come up later.
Celine, go on. You mute.
You are muted.
Hello. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Celine Cohen. I grew up in Israel, and today I live in Berlin. But I had spent 10 years living in Turkey. I moved to Turkey when I was 15 with my father. And of course, the first couple of years were mainly spent on getting over the first cultural shocks and adapting to society, learning the language. But very soon after that, I started realizing some nuances in society, and it was already Erdogan times. Erdogan was first elected in 2002. Of course, I don't know times in Turkey, but back in 2010, he was already in power. He was already getting more and more daring in his speeches and in his plans, and things were going to the wrong direction already. I have to say that it wasn't even nearly as bad as it is today. I remember back in 2010, even though it was technically still like it was already the Erdogan regime, I remember all my friends and family members in Israel being very happy for me because I moved to Istanbul and it's such a fun place to live in. And it was. The nightlife was amazing. And all the beaches, and it was generally mainly a democratic country per se. Turkey has a very secular constitution made by the first leader of the Turkish Republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. His principles are very democratic and very secular. And the current regime has taken many steps to slowly destroy it. Now, I can tell you about a lot of things that happened, each and every step about how we slowly lost our rights there, how freedom of speech has become almost non-existent. But I think it's pretty much the same process in all the countries that are represented in here today. Of course, I can get into details when the time comes, according to the questions, but when it comes to my experience, I can say that it's not like the Turks were not brave. I remember the times of the Gezi Park protests back in 2013. I took an active part in them, and there were more than 1 million protesters. I know that in Israel they say 200,000, but the Israeli population is around 8 million. In Israel, it was kind of the equivalent. In Turkey, it was kind of the equivalent of it in a way of more than 1 million, sometimes more than 2 million protesters in the Gezi Park protests. But after around a month of non-stop protesting, people got tired. We didn't actually get a result, but the police could not evacuate us from Gezi Park for over a month. But at some point, people got tired, and the police came in the right day, the right time, and evacuated Gezi Park. And since then, the regime has become, how you say, like, they started getting even more scared because they saw the Gezi Park protests, and they vowed to never let anything like that happen to them ever again. So since then, a bit before that as well, but they basically started to scare people by opening lawsuits against people who say critical things about the regime. The method was technically perfectly legal. What they do is that they take something that is actually obviously just criticism and try to pass it on as an insult. Hoping that they can charge you under the criminal code and maybe send you to jail, or even if not, still good enough to scare most people. Because we're talking about the very basic freedom that a person has. In 2014, we founded the very first atheist organization, Atheist Association in Turkey, because the situation with separation of religion and state has become very dire in Turkey. And atheists and also generally secular people with secular lifestyles, were very much discriminated against. So we wanted to fight against it. So we gathered together and formed the very first official atheist NGO. So I was a founder member, and between the years of 2018 and 2021, I also served as the president of the association. I've dealt with multiple cases, some of them from Turkey, and some of them were atheist refugees running away to Turkey, asylum seekers, atheists from Iran who had to escape a lot worse. And Turkey was the neighboring country they could just go to very quickly and very easily. So within the years, I don't know what happened or how it was very much before 2010, but I could actually witness how they narrow the space of our freedom and especially freedom of speech and freedom of lifestyle within the years, step by step. And in 2020, a lawsuit was filed against me, again with the same method, trying to pass something as if it's an insult to somebody. But the person who filed the lawsuit was not the prosecutor. It was a private citizen, probably an Erdogan supporter, but that was the moment. I was already pretty much burnt out after all these years, and at that moment, I remember feeling a bit disappointed because it's not even the government anymore; it's people who support it. A private citizen went through the trouble of filing a lawsuit against me, and that was the point. That was the point I felt like I'm done, because it's a moment where you feel like, why am I doing this and who am I doing this for? And I realized that it's time for me to end the chapter of Turkey in my life, and I moved to Berlin in October 2021. So I have this period of 10 years in which I can share my experiences from. I also had a very brief October 2022 of 1 week in Turkey, which it was a short visit, exactly a year after I left. And we will talk a lot about our insights and experience. There's one thing I can say within this introduction is that Israelis should not stop. I think it's the 18th week of the protests. When we got tired after a month in Gezi Park, that was the last time we could protest. It was the last time we could freely. After that, it has become nearly impossible. So Turkey at home for many years, 10 glorious years. Now, before anybody jumps up to their seat from their seats about this, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I forgot my hometown in Israel, but for 10 years, Turkey was the place I always came back to, even after visiting Israel to visit my family and my friends and having some nostalgia. It was my home for 10 glorious years. And now it's mainly a source of bad memories due to the past few years. And I don't want to lose another country. And I'm sure no one in here wants to lose their country. And I may be pessimistic to say that perhaps it could be a bit too late for some countries. But it's not too late for Israel. If you don't want your own country to be your biggest sources of stress, distress, and trauma, then you cannot afford to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you. For now, you want to go?
Yes, why not? Am I clear? Is my mic audio?
It's okay.
I'm like seriously humbled to be here with people who are protesting for democracy and freedom. I come from Bangladesh, and all my life I have been doing this, fighting authoritarianism. I've been to jail first time when I was 16. I was a student leader, former student leader. Now I was attacked by police. I was attacked by the Islamic terrorists. I am on a terrorist hit list. So you name it, I experienced it all. And today's meeting, I come from a country because I'm interacting with a group of Israeli citizens. Just because of that, I can be convicted and accused of treason. I'm saying it for you guys to understand the systematic anti-Semitism out there in the world. What's most impressive here is how many are we here today? 200? Nearly 200. That means 300 opinions. If we take into consideration the phrase to use 3 opinions. The phrase is often used as sarcasm, but to me, it is a strength of Israel, given I come from a country where opinions are censored. Israeli marketplace of ideas is vibrant. We can see it from the progress and prosperity Israel has made, despite being situated in a hostile neighborhood and despite the fact that a significant part of the world doesn't wish Israel to succeed. This marketplace of ideas, the most crucial aspect of Israel, is, in my view, at risk. I'm going to be brief, just point out a few aspects that happened in Bangladesh in the name of democracy, of course, just a few years ago, and happening now in Israel. The current ruling party in Bangladesh has a long history of struggle for democracy and is seen as the flag bearer of democracy in Bangladesh. Unfortunately, since 2014, it changed course. Today, even the election process in Bangladesh is marked with serious questions. The party became authoritarian, and it started with taking control of the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. Unlike Israel, Bangladesh actually has a very well-written constitution, which is secular as well, something that is essential for a democracy, in my view. It outlines the roles of the different wings of government very clearly. Check and balance is enshrined into it. The judiciary in Bangladesh was designed in a way that it can have power over the legislative and can hold the parliament accountable to an independent body. We are living in the era of populist politicians. This arrangement was essential for the most important organs of the state within checks and balances, and prevents them from abusing power. On 22nd September 2014, because of an observation by the Supreme Court, which asked for qualification of the parliamentarians, 16th Amendment of the Bangladesh Constitution was passed. The 16th Amendment allows the parliament to impeach judges and remove them based on incapacity and misconduct. Previously, it was the duty of the Supreme Judicial Council, a body that is similar to the Israeli current system. The amendment was challenged legally. Surendra Kumar Sinha, the Chief Justice of that time, headed the Supreme Court when it ruled in 2017 that Parliament could not sack judges, a move held by lawyers as safeguarding judicial independence. The Chief Justice was forced to step down. He had to flee the country and currently lives in North America, where his asylum was granted. He was later sentenced in absentia to 11 years in jail for corruption in a case that civil rights groups thought was politically motivated. Those who criticized the government action were pitched as elites, so similar to the Israeli scenario. I was watching an interview of an Israeli political commentator a few days ago. This is exactly what he was saying. The Israeli court is controlled by the elites. This is a telltale characteristic of populism. Populist politicians all over the world do this, pitching the nation against some kind of elitism. When they get away with the court without any resistance, what would be the next target? You all could imagine, I believe, press freedom and free speech. In 2018, the parliament in Bangladesh passed the Digital Security Act 2018. This law criminalizes honest people for speaking out. Journalists, rights campaigner, social activists, just for delivering on their commitment to the society. Between January 2020 and February 2022, in just 21 months, 80 politicians, 50 journalists, and 47 student activists were arrested just for doing their job and expressing thoughts. Now, some of you might think Israel cannot be compared to Bangladesh. In fact, Bangladesh is a third world developing country. And you might think like, Israeli politicians, they cannot undermine press freedom and free speech in Israel. Just remember, it happened in the United States. Donald Trump undermining press as fake news outlets and name-calling civil rights defender is a very recent memory. Some of us continued fighting, most gave up. This is exactly how it works in favor of authoritarianism. Sometimes the government, because of the public outcry, steps back a little, just for a while, then they put forward another agenda. The activists burn out because of exhaustion. In the end, we all just give up and get used to the new normal. From my experience of long activism, if I am to share one wisdom, that would be don't settle down or compromise in the name of middle ground. What is right cannot be compromised in the name of win-win situation. Because next would be the marketplace of ideas, that which I believe you all would agree is at the center of Israel's prosperity. The price of speaking out can be very high. We must acknowledge that. in my case, exiled from home. I'm currently living in Germany. It might not be same for Israelis though, or maybe the same. My life was saved by an Israeli citizen, Aaron Segev. He migrated to another country because he was struggling to accommodate himself in a society that was increasingly replacing human virtues such as compassion, empathy, and humility with hatred and populism. Many of my Israeli friends now tell me that they are considering migration for the same reason. Being an exile activist, I would suggest you not to migrate from your own country unless your life is at stake, because you'll never find peace and happiness. You'll miss your family and friends miserably, and there would be a profound emptiness in you forever. It's better to fight than giving up, even when you are exhausted. Thank you for it.
Thank you. Thank you. Laura, do you want to continue?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura, and I am from Poland. I'm working with Christian in the same office, so we might share some common points. But Christian was speaking about seeing and witnessing the regime and the far-right populists in power in Poland. And I would like to make some point how to felt this in practice, how to felt the consequences, how I felt the consequences about taking part in the resistance. So I can start that in 2019, I was just a high school student who got involved in the many protests focused on the climate change and environmental situation. And this time, I see that police was at the protest to protect us. But it didn't take so much time that after 1 year, in the same situation, I expected the violence of the same police that was used by the government of my country to stop the mass protests after the sentence of the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland about the abortion law. And this time, I was witnessing many violence, all on the political purpose, on all the afraid government who just couldn't handle the situation. And what I wanted to say, that in recent years, both Poland and Israel have seen their democracies threatened. In Poland, the ruling Law and Justice Party has been accused of undermining the independence of the judiciary, limiting freedom of the press, and targeting minority groups. In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu attacked the judiciary, disregard the rule of law, and attempt to silence the media. But despite these challenges, there are many brave citizens in both countries who are fighting to protect their democracies. In Poland, as I say, we have seen mass protests against the government's attempt to restrict abortion rights and limit the independence of the judiciary. In Israel, we have seen mass protests against corruption, attacks on the media, and attempts to undermine the rule of law. And these citizens are standing up for the fundamental principles of the democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech, and respect for human rights. They are demonstrating the power of protest and the importance of holding our leaders accountable. But the fight for democracy is not just about what is happening in Poland and Israel. We have much further perspective because this is a global fight. The challenges that we face are significant, but we must not lose hope. We must continue to fight for what is right and to demand that our leaders respect the principles of the democracy. We must stand in solidarity with those who are fighting for democracy around the world. The fight for democracy is not just a political struggle. It is a moral one. It is a fight for the values that we hold dear: freedom, justice, and equality. And it's a fight that we must all take part in, whenever, like, we live in Poland, Israel, or anywhere else in the world. So let us stand together, united in our commitment to democracy. Let us hold our leaders accountable and demand that they respect the will of the people. And let us never forget that the power of democracy lies not in the hands of few, but in the hands of the many. And what I wanted to say, you might see many people giving up. You might see many people speaking, this is not the time to take part. And I wanted to say, the time to take part in the resistance is always. It's always, because in Poland, I guess we will speak with Krystian more about this, but we have seen many points that we should get involved and we didn't. I can tell you that in 2020, the mass protests, they were happening all around the Poland. In Warsaw, the protests, of course, they were the biggest ones. They used mass forces of the police. They used violence against the protesters. We still have ongoing cases about breaking the arms or legs of the protesters. But also the small cities, they lead this revolution. But our problem is that the revolution just disappeared. And it disappeared by, unfortunately, really easy way. In my hometown, that is really small, but near to Wrocław, which is like the capital city of the region, we have expected, using the press who supported our government, that was used to spread the news about the prosecutor's office accusing us. I didn't get a letter. I didn't get a phone call from the police station. We just read in the newspaper that we are accused of spreading pandemic because the protests that we made, it was in the pandemic times. And I would say this is an absurd, but the absurd just started. They wanted to silence us, but it's run out their control, and it's only motivated me to take part more and more. Just 1 year later, me and my two friends, after listening to the Minister of Education in Poland, who is a far-right fundamentalist and is using his position to make an indoctrinated education, we see that he was speaking in the public TV that LGBTQ plus people are not normal people. And it spread all around the Poland, and nobody acted. So me and my friends, just after the Matura exam, we chained ourselves to the building of the Ministry of Education, and we wanted to talk to the minister. The result was he agreed, but on the meeting, after 2 weeks, when we ended the protest, this was 24 hours hunger strike. But I can tell you that he showed on the meeting on a Zoom. He didn't come in person. You know why? He told us that the prime minister made him to do many, many important tasks, and that's why he couldn't be in person with us. And when we just were reading his words, his quotes, and we were confronting him, he was saying that, you know what? This is a lie. I will accuse all of you, and we will meet in the court. So this was the first and I think the last attempt to have a dialogue with this government. Now, unfortunately, I have seen that the repressions are taking more and more because many of the activists live from the morning to morning. We every morning check the system of the court to see if there are new cases ongoing, new accusations made by police. And I can tell you this is, for me, a routine, but for many people, it is being in a threat that is on the go. I also need to have a step back because the repressions were not only against me, also against my mother, who was working as accountant in the foster care house for the children. After I write the intervention in our office, they had a unexpected control about the finances. Also about my fiance, an activist from Iraq, who had a problem to get refugee status in Poland. So I just want to say that never think about if this is right time or no. We have slept about many opportunities to take proper care about our country. And that's why we are here. And I think we can all stand arm by arm in our fight. Thank you.
Thank you for the strong words. Queen, go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Queen Fox. I'm an Israeli entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur. I started 3 companies here in Israel. I have a couple of patents, and now I work as a principal engineer in an Israeli unicorn named Big ID. I've been activist for some years, an atheist back in the day, and feminist and LGBTQ plus activists for a few years. I'm in the board of directors for Mavarim, Israeli trans community, which is the largest transgender organization in Israel. And also with a project named Transpose for training and integrating transgender people in the high-tech industry here in Israel. Last April, we represented the NGO Mavarim in the UN for the human rights review on Israel that is actually going now as we speak. And when everything started, or when this government came to power, I thought that, well, we're in a bad situation because I knew what the extremist religious parties wanted. I knew their opinions about LGBTQ plus people. We know now that the party, Noam party, which is the more extreme one, keeps blacklists of LGBTQ people, activists, and influencers. And I realized that if they make this coalition happen, then we're in a very bad situation. And I felt targeted. That's why when Smotrich, our Minister of Currency, right? He proposed a discrimination law, which allows people to discriminate based on the religious faith, and it was very clearly targeting LGBTQ people. We had the first demonstration, and that was the second demonstration I've ever been in my life. And it was about 2,000 people. It was small. I looked to the left and to the right and thought, okay, so we're done for. But then the same week, right before the weekend, they came up with the judicial overhaul. And then people started coming up. And that Saturday it was 30,000, and next Saturday it was 80,000 and 100,000 and more. And we've been at it nonstop for 18 weeks now. And I'm very proud of the Israeli people who are fighting for our rights, fighting for me, fighting for themselves. And I'm very honored to be in this panel and to hear people from other countries and their experience with the same processes that led to this point. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to say that all the words you were saying, all of you, were very strong. I feel like the most prominent sentence that we heard was to keep on fighting and don't give up. And I think it's really exciting. We'll go back to it. I believe during our discussion. I'd like to hear from you in any order that you want. How is it your feeling of living in your country right now? what atmosphere you feel around you, what things that are happening that infect your life. It would be interesting to hear. Anyone wants to go?
Sure. I mean, I can be proactive this time for sure. And actually, I wanted to reflect on some of the things that other people have said as well. It's hard to do a complete introduction. I realized I didn't tell you too much about the state Hungary is in. It's a fairly small country. I wouldn't say it has great significance in international politics by itself. However, unfortunately, in European politics, it does have a large impact, mostly due to its authoritarian standing. And I usually refrain from calling the Hungarian regime a government, because calling it a government would imply governance. And I would say that's not the governing principle. It's more about the insane theft of public funds and EU funds. It extends beyond any rationality. It's a self-fulfilling psychological problem for our politicians, and sometimes they pretend like they are governing certain sectors of the country, but that's all for show, and everything is about the centralization of power. And the problem is that it never stops. So some people might believe that there is a status quo that's going to be settled, but that's not how regimes work. And the problem is, like, we here in this panel see like the different stages and versions of illiberalism, and what we can see is there's no end point. Like, it's more of a psychological process than anything of a logical process. So just because the Orban regime has won 4 times in the election with 2/3 majority, that doesn't stop them from introducing newer and stricter regulations to oppress their own citizens. Like, it's not that they're satisfied with the level of oppression or power they have. It's always going to be stronger. It's always going to be tighter, and they're not going to stop until they are stopped. And that is the problem. So that is why we have to really stay vigilant. And of course, for example, in Bangladesh, it's an entirely different scenario because your physical safety is in danger. I could mention Russia or Turkey. In Hungary, at least, your physical safety is not in danger yet. However, we might arrive at that point. Just recently, for example, our president pardoned a convicted terrorist in Hungary, saying that the Pope is visiting Hungary, and in the spirit of the Pope's visit, she is going to pardon a convicted terrorist who was trying to kill people for their opposing political beliefs. And now this might serve as a signal to extremist elements that everybody has a free shot at attacking activists, which hasn't been very common in Hungary, although not unheard of. I myself have received numerous death threats, which the police refused to investigate. I wrote a lot about secularism for the last 6-7 years, and I was warning my fellow citizens about the dangers of the lack of secularism. And well, my point was proven when I was fired from my completely unrelated job in Hungary in 2021. I was working as an environmental scientist at City Hall, at the so-called liberal readership of City Hall, which is in opposition to Orban, or so they say. And I was called a blasphemer by the ruling Christian Democratic Party, and they asked for my termination. And the so-called liberal mayor fired me in 2 days and issued a statement that I'm unfit for office. And then I got the death threats and the rest. I have sued my former employer, and I have won 2 times in court already, but they are still appealing. But this resulted in my complete blacklisting in Hungary. I'm unable to work in my profession in Hungary, despite me having 4 diplomas from leading universities. Therefore, in professional setting, it's very possible to ruin your career. Other journalists, activists have faced similar fates. There was a journalist who was charged with insulting the Hungarian nation. and he was sentenced to a fine. Another one was doing a satire production of religion, and he was also sentenced for offending religious sensibilities. So de facto, there is a blasphemy law in effect in Hungary. I would say these cases are few and in between, but the reaction is usually similar. Sometimes there's even a ruling, a criminal proceeding. Death threats are very common, although luckily not acted upon at this moment. But we can see this trajectory, and especially when it comes to religion and secularism, we see that the government is very much trying to string its illiberal agenda onto religion. So they're using it as a moral foundation, and they're using it to push through some of their most oppressive ideologies. And the Hungarian churches are completely partnered with the government, or sorry, the kleptocracy or the regime of Hungary in this sense. So we can see this very dangerous trend with illiberal regimes, how they weaponize religion, they gain the support of churches, and they are allied in oppressing and brainwashing their citizens. And of course, we can see historical examples for this as well. We can look at how the fascist regime of Italy cooperated with the church. I mean, the Vatican was established by Mussolini. So I think that's a good example, but I could say others as well. So in this sense, we can see how this works. In Hungary, I would say the way they do it is they outsource vital services to the church. So now in Hungary, 98% of the foster care system, so the child protective services, are in the hands of the churches. Which churches basically fundamentally let their employees abuse children throughout history and throughout countries. We just know, for example, in France, how more than 300,000 victims have been found by a state inquiry who were molested by priests from the Catholic Church. Despite this, in Hungary, there is no official investigation, and there won't be one, because both the church and the state publicly refuses to do so, and yet they receive child protective services. So in general, I would say that vital government services, and especially the treatment of vulnerable and marginalized groups, are outsourced to the church, and they get the funding for that, and they are trying to get the ideological benefit of converting these people to Christianity in a way, and the government is hoping that these people, of course, will support them, because religion equals morals, and religion equals the government or the regime. Therefore, this is the connection they're trying to enforce. Despite the fact that Hungary is not a very religious country, by recent polls, we see that only 10 to 15% of Hungarians think that religion is important in their daily lives. Only 4% of young people go to church weekly. So it doesn't necessarily depend on how religious society actually is. It depends on what the regime intends. And finally, I would say that the biggest problem is that the opposition parties are completely in line with this illiberal agenda. So they're not even trying to oppose the government when it comes to religion. They are actually supporting the government in a way, as in my case shows how I was fired by an opposition mayor at the request of the government. But also the Pope visited recently in Hungary, and all the opposition leaders were praising the Pope of him being such a good leader of ethics and such a good leader of morals, despite the fact that the church is still one of the most illiberal institutions in the world, opposing fundamental human rights such as the equality of women, the right for contraception, and also the rights of LGBTQ community. And despite the fact the agreement was complete in the media and the politics that the visit of the Pope was a good thing, which actually all the taxpayers paid for. So we can see that in many different topics, the opposition is taking the opinion of the government, and I get to wonder what is left in the end. If they all become like the government in the hopes of defeating the government, then what is the difference really? There has to be a line, has to be drawn, and I think one of the most important things we have to do is to convince political stakeholders to stand firm in secularism. and despite the very strong ideological framework, because finally what the government also says is that migration of Muslim people can only be stopped by a Christian defense of Europe, and this is of course something echoed throughout Western Europe as well. But the problem, sorry.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but let's continue. I really want to follow you on the economic issue that you started with, but since we got into religion, I would like to ask Laura about the involvement of the religion in the abortion law that really made a lot of impact in Poland.
Well, I can tell you that there's a huge impact about the religion and abortion right, but also about how this is all connected. For example, the church has been used for years to spread the political agenda of our government. We have experienced the bishops and the priests using their celebrations to speak to the people to go to church, like, don't vote to this party, they support the deviation of the LGBTQ people, and such things like this. And this is really hard, because sometimes to make our point to the Polish society, we must avoid the topics that are connected to religion. You know why? Because there's a huge impact and the legacy after previous government that's like seriously connected our country to the all Catholic religion world and everything that is happening. But what I wanted to say about the abortion right, this is really, I can tell, this was an opportunity, and it was used by some powers to spread the motivation for in the citizens to fight. But some of them were balancing, like the biggest opposition party, whether of like better is to support the agenda or maybe no. Maybe we should play for the people who elected the current government, or maybe we should like tell that in some part we agree. And this was really terrifying to watch because whatever is happening, we can see that in TV there are two main topics and the same people talking. For example, we have many abortion debates in the TV, as well like public TV, but also the free media, and mostly the politicians that were speaking. First, there were politicians, not activists, who lead the protest. Second, only men. And also the people who have been elected and they are still getting re-elected to the parliament for years. What I can tell you more is this is really hard because in Poland we have a situation when we have one common enemy and we still can't mobilize. We still fight with each other. We still fight with the leftist party and the center party. We fight in the activist societies. And we must learn how to talk before we will talk about winning the elections, because even now we are preparing to the most important elections after 8 years of ruling of our government, and we still can't find a common language. Basically, this is because of being afraid of the religion topic. So yeah, this was my comment, and I know that Christian would add many more.
Yes, we have our religion problem, but it's a bit different than what you have. We won't get into it now. You did mention a free press. Do you still have free press? Maybe Celine, can you extend about the free press in Turkey? We know we heard in the past that Erdogan was able to stop many of the free press, arrest people, shut down newspapers. Can you tell us about it?
Sorry, I was muted again. When it comes to freedom of speech and free press, first of all, I'd like to mention that I studied my bachelor degree in journalism in Ege University in Izmir in Turkey. And I remember studying during the times it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And even the like we had some kind of like something between an apprenticeship and like it was in school. There was this kind of an in-school agency, news agency that we had to do some kind of internship there for our studies. And I remember that the news stories they were giving us were so neutral that I couldn't even understand why they even worthy of being used. Like the only things they sent us to report about was some kind of some kind of announcement about some art gallery opening, which is good as well, but that's it. Absolutely nothing even remotely political was covered in that internship. And also outside of school, it's not just in the place that you study journalism. As I've said before, I don't live in Turkey anymore. But like the last time I remember is before I left in October 2021, and the 1 week window of my visit in October 2022 when I visited a few friends. One of my best friends was getting married. Otherwise, I wouldn't have visited so soon after all these years. So I remember in that week there was some severe case of a coal mine crash, and lots of people died, and the reason was the government that didn't do its job when it comes to providing everything that's needed for safety. I don't exactly remember the details, but it was clearly the government's fault, according to many people's views. And one person was arrested simply for tweeting the words, "It's the Ministry of Interior Affairs' fault." That's all he wrote. And that was enough. It got to a point that this was enough for him to get arrested within less than 24 hours. So, so what's the situation of freedom of press in Turkey? I would say there is none, which I would like to also refer to some of the things said by Gaspar. He said that it's supposed to be like the party in Hungary is supposedly the neoliberal party. Yeah, well, also the party of Erdogan calls itself neoliberal, but there's absolutely nothing liberal about them. Liberal is supposed to be something about, freedom-centered. Absolutely not. The thing they dread the most is your personal freedom and your independence and your self-reliance. And I think that's something in common for all authoritarian regimes and all politicians who aspire to have authoritarian level of power. So my advice, what to do so your country never gets to this point: put freedom first, but not just your own.
I would like to add something. This is quite concerning. Can you hear me, Amir?
Yeah, we can hear you very well.
Yes, that is. This is a message we often get from Israeli liberals. I mean, people who are protesting in this demonstration and democracy. That those who has voted for the right wing, these are people, 20% of Israeli people, they do not work, they do not pay tax. And this is an us and them situation. The people who are protesting for democracy and freedom, they're educated class of the country, and education is a privilege. And if you are privileged, it is your duty to reach out to the people who are underprivileged, who doesn't have the same level of education as you do. And this is, we see all over the world, even in America, in the Hungary, in Italy, in France, those right-wing people, okay, we just, instead of listening to their concerns, we would just say, oh, you guys are bigots, and we cornered them. And when we cornered them, our message do not go to them, or that message doesn't come to us as well. And this is very problematic, because like if you are educated, it is your duty to reach out to them. It is you cannot expect them to reach out to you because they're underprivileged in this situation. And this is something every country must, like everywhere, the left and liberals, they need to address this.
Christian wanted to add something.
Yes, I would like add two things to Laura's statement, because firstly, and it will be also a little bit about freedom of speech and freedom of press. This is our Polish local newspaper, Gazeta Wrocławska, Wrocław's newspaper, which was bought by the government, by the Orlen, which is a government, government institution. And in this very newspaper, on the first side, we have an article, and I will translate for you, on the back of Prime Minister, how a high school social science teacher and friend of the communists become a specialist about politics. This article is about a teacher. He's still teaching in one of the Wrocław's high schools, and he was a teacher of our Prime Minister of Poland. He gave few interviews because he was asked about his thoughts about the current Prime Minister. He gave interviews especially about education, not about Prime Minister. He just mentioned him in 2 sentences. And they wrote this article about him when they're saying he's a communist, he cooperated with the communist regime in Poland, and so on and so on. And I can tell you, because I know this teacher, he is also my teacher. He taught me in my high school. And this is how it looks like living under populism in Poland. You can be a teacher and you can be asked about education. But if you will say one word which is not correct for the government, you'll be put on the first pages of their newspapers, and they will be claiming that you're a communist propagator, which is in Poland one of the most important insults you can imagine. That's the first thing. And second thing, I don't quite agree with all what Laura said, because in Poland, our connection with religion, with Catholic Church, is more complicated than I believe in other countries, because all parties, also leftist, also liberal, they are connected with the church because they have to. Because in Poland, where majority, 90% are Catholics, and this church has a very big impact on our politics. Since 1989, we cannot just reject this impact. It's not so simple. So that's the one thing. And the second thing, it's not only the abortion law when we are talking about human rights, but also we have racism, nationalism. Now, on independence marches, we see people who are going with transparent Europe will be white or desert. So that's another problem. We have problem with refugees on our border. People are dying there. In a few days will be a funeral of a Nigerian, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, African lady who tried to finish her PhD in Poland or in France, in European Union, let's say. So I believe that among many problems, we as Polish people, especially when Cameroonian, of course, Cameroonian lady, but we have many problems with religion, but also with human rights in general. Not only LGBTQ+, not only women's rights, but also, for example, racial minorities and refugees' rights. And that, I think, it's a very important issue to take under consideration. Thank you.
Transition, you were talking about the refugees, minorities. I would like to turn to Queen. Tell us, do you already feel changes in Israel? How is your feeling about what's going on in Israel right now and other places that you work with?
Yeah, so I think that if it were a form, I would click all of the above. We see that we have the fundamentalist religious people, the ultra-Orthodox, are joining in with the judicial coup. It is a religious struggle that we have in Israel for many years. And well, I thought until now that it was like fringe of the religious movements in Israel. And I have to say that not all religious people support this judicial coup, and many actually are against it and demonstrate with us. But we see that the main line of the more extremists in the government, excuse it by using religion. And we definitely see less women in this government and in the offices. And we see that they canceled a law that was supposed to protect women from abusive partners. And we see that they canceled the joining of Israel to the Istanbul Treaty for protecting women. And there's definitely a rise in violence and hate speech and hate crimes against LGBTQ+ people. When I was in the UN, we made this report. We saw 11% rise in LGBT violence cases and 53% rise in transgender violence. And in this month, it almost doubled. So there is definitely this rise. And I think that we've seen all of it. In the About press, we see that there is a strong rise in the rating for Arutz 14, Channel 14, which is controlled by government and spreading, fake and hate. And the other channels, they try to be more or less objective, but we see that they don't handle religious issues. They try to shy away from statements that are strongly against or for any side. And that's what Celine said. It's like neutral. You read the news and most of them is just neutral. While the other side, Channel 14, is using very strong language, even hate speech in some cases, and this is not a fair fight. So I definitely think that we see it happening in Israel, but at the same time, I think that right now the judicial coup is not yet finalized, and it's not illegal to say things about government, and maybe many people do, and it's important to keep saying it and keep pushing it in social media and in the news, and that hopefully will help us to resist this wave and even maybe to win this.
Interesting. There's an interesting question I want to ask to Noy. When I know people don't know it, but I know that you work with countries and many people in dangerous situation. And we are talking right now about changes that are happening all over the world. I would be very interested to ask you, do you see any change in the amount of people in distress that are asking for your help?
Yeah, yes, of course. This happens actually. It is very much involved with the specific human rights department I work with, defending the non-believers. So I'm director at Atheist Support Network at Atheist Alliance International. And authoritarianism needs some platforms, and one of their platforms is religion. Like they heavily use religion because of the freedom also involves that we should be able to criticize any authority. And religion is an authority, and wherever authoritarianism is involved, we are seeing like more and more cases of blasphemy in democratic countries like Malaysia, in Turkey, in countries like Bangladesh, even India, the world's largest democracy now. Okay, and India has a very communal government, Hindu nationalists there, and authoritarian for sure. So this is very much increasing. Also, you know that previously I have mentioned that my friends, Israeli friends, they are thinking of leaving Israel because they cannot live in this situation where religion and authoritarians would dictate their life. And these are the people actually, because I'm a well-known atheist and my friends are mostly very much atheist or very liberal, and these are the people, they are thinking about leaving Israel. So yes, it is a very common phenomenon. Okay, wherever there is authoritarianism, there is an increase of risk involved to freedom-loving people, and we are seeing that increase very much.
So we won't complete this conversation without one thing that you mentioned, and it came out to a photo. You said we heard about people are living. We are hearing that in Hungary there were many laws concerning taxation, limiting the amount of money companies can earn. We see it all the time. Do you see any impact on the economy? Do you see fundings that go out? Because that's something that really scares Israelis right here, because we are afraid that all the money, especially the high-tech money, will just go out of the country into to the States, to liberal Europe, etc. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, of course. Well, I would say that the regime has an idea of how they want to establish the economy. So they used much of the EU funding, which came to the country unchecked, to finance their own enterprises. So the EU, unfortunately, was very lenient when it comes to funding, and only in recent years has increased checks and verifications. But even that's not good enough. I mean, now there is a number of funds that have been frozen. due to corruption and lack of rule of law. It's important to mention that Hungary cannot be considered a democracy anymore because there is a rule of decree since 2016. So the parliament has partially been suspended, as there's always a state of emergency, first for migration, then COVID, and now for the war. And I'm sure they're going to invent another reason in the coming years. So even though they have 2/3 majority, they suspended parliamentary and decision making, so they can just rule by decree whenever they want, and they actually do. So this is one of the reasons why EU has frozen funds finally, but this is 13 years into this regime. So in that sense, when it comes to the economy, we see a growth in GDP, of course. However, that's hardly an indicator of welfare of people. Income disparities have risen sharply. When you look at the Gini index, for example, and we can see that the regime has its idea that basically people should work in factories. So the idea is that more and more people work in factories and low-paying jobs, and Hungary is like this assembly line for Western technology, and this is how it will increase its economic growth. But of course, in order for them to do this is to force people into low-paying jobs and to destroy education systems. So there are constantly protests. Actually, protests happened this week as well. Teachers are criminally underpaid. The school systems are understaffed. There are thousands of teachers missing. The higher education is now remote controlled by the regime. So they're trying to discourage people from attending university so they can remain in like a low-paying, low-skilled job. And this serves a dual purpose. First of all, as I said, they can get income from the assembly factories of different automotive industries. But on the other hand, it's easier to manipulate people who are susceptible to government handouts. So obviously, if people have a low-paying job, then they can easily be convinced to vote for the party or the regime with, let's say, a check of 500 euros, or even like 20 euros at Christmas. And this is what they do. They do like small hands out, small gifts at every election turn, and this convinces people that the regime actually cares about them. And the the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Péter Szijjártó, he said at the last election, at 2018, that the goal of the government is to keep wages low. So the idea is to keep wages low as much as possible. So much of the growth that the country has seen is basically absorbed by oligarchs and their extended families and connections. And I would say much of the prosperity that the EU funds could have brought have not achieved the effect that we were hoping for. And when we look at other countries in the region, they have developed a lot further as their rule of law was a lot more advanced. So on one last note for the taxation system, in Hungary, we have a single key tax system, meaning everybody pays the same percentage of income tax. However, the value-added tax is the highest in the European Union, 27%. So this system is obviously set up to cancel out redistribution. So it's a way to impoverish people, because obviously poor people are paying the same amount of value-added tax as everybody else, but the personal income tax, the rich people don't have to contribute as much as they should in other countries.
And I want to add only one sentence to what Gaspar just said, because in Poland we have saying Polak, Węgier, dwa bratanki. Pole and Hungarian is like family. And also the real leader of Poland, Jarosław Kaczyński, said in 2015, before they took over, we want Budapest in Warsaw. So when I hear what are you saying, Gaspar, I feel first of all, we are like family. We have the same, we have very similar situation, and also we have really Budapest in Warsaw. So I wanted to add this.
Yeah, also one more thing I forgot now that we talked about the similarities. the church is getting extreme amount of funding. Hungary has the highest amount of church funding per capita in the EU from public funds. So that's one of the things they're doing. They're out there having public funds and they're putting it into religion, and basically the church is free from taxes, it's free from inquiries, and nobody dares to question what they're doing with the funds. So like one of the church districts is building a stadium and a restaurant and things like that, and nobody knows where the funds are going and what they're using it for. So it's hard to even quantify it in terms of euros, but like 1,000 billion forints, which I can't even count how much is that, but a lot. And of course, this all goes from Hungarian taxpayers' money, including those who are atheists as well.
You know, what Gaston was saying was really kind of scared me, because a week ago, Netanyahu said in Israel that it will be okay if the bad money will go out and the good money will go in. I think that's what you meant, what you said. The good money is the money that will make you impoverished and lose money and make most of the citizens in Israel, instead of a high-tech industry, to make the low-tech industry much stronger. I hope it's not true, but that's what I understood from what you said. Celine wanted to add something, so I will later say what you wanted.
Yes. First of all, I would also like to add that the tax money of everyone in Turkey is also spent on mosques and many different, perhaps some of them very shady foundations of religion. And it's also paid from the tax money of atheists as well. Atheists, Christians, Jews. You don't have to be a Muslim to be robbed by the Islamic religious institutions in Turkey, and I would also like to make some kind of comparison, not exactly comparison, but something from Turkey that I think my fellow Israelis could potentially take as an example. One of the most famous speeches of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was called Addressing the Youth, because he was addressing the youth in his speech. And in that particular part, he said that it was after the War of Independence of Turkey, and of course the enemies were the Greeks and other countries. And he said in that speech that one day the enemies will be from the inside. And those enemies might even be traitors from the inside who will completely occupy all the institutions of the state and rule it completely, occupy it completely. But this shall not make you fear, and you shall not hesitate. And you must somehow find the power within yourself to fight against it and protect democracy. Now, in Israel, we also had War of Independence, and also more wars after that. And there's always this value we were raised with about being heroes and being brave against the enemies from the outside. But we have to remember that the enemy from the inside is not going to destroy us any less. Today, we might be stronger physically against the enemies from the outside, but we don't seem to be as powerful about the enemies from the inside. And we should have the same amount of courage. And I know it's a bit difficult to say it to some generations in Israel, because there's a difference between when it comes to moving abroad, leaving Israel. There's a huge difference between the approach of my generation and the approach of the older generations. The older generations look at Israel, of their country, as the only country that doesn't have to offer a good bargain for your bucks. Like even if they charge you extremely high percentages of taxes and giving them all to corrupted people and not doing their job, and even using that tax money and all the measures and the power against you and against democracy to destroy it. They're still not going to leave, not necessarily, not all of them because they want to stay and fight, but because they're loyal to their country. And it's okay if you choose, whether you choose to leave or whether you choose to stay. I'm not going to judge anybody's lifestyle choices. That is your life and it is your choice. But I believe it would be very good if you at least make the government think that you can leave and that you would leave. Because this mentality of loyalty actually makes the government, the regime, a lot more comfortable to do whatever they want. Because they know a lot of people are not going to leave, they're going to stay and obey if they have to, and keep paying the taxes, keep working hard, keep contributing with their skills to the country. But if they knew that the minute they push your limits, you're just going to take your skills, your company, and your money and move to a different country, they might be a bit more cautious about the limits. I know a lot of people on the Israeli radios said, oh, if they want to go, they should go. We don't want your money. But that's not the reality. And they know that.
Very interesting. Does anyone else have any suggestion what is good that we can do? What things you did that worked? What things that you did didn't work?
If I can add something about that, first of all, in Poland we embrace similar position, but I'm not so sure if this works, because when we have COVID pandemics all around the world, in Poland, in Polish parliament in Sejm, we had a debate about our public healthcare. Maybe you know, in Poland we have public healthcare. We pay taxes, we pay for NFZ and stuff like that, and we can go to the doctor for free, let's say. And we are facing with lack of doctors, with lack of nurses and all medical stuff, let's say. And when one of the members of parliament from opposition said, look, because of you, these young doctors, the young nurses, and this whole this healthcare people, let's say, they're running away. They're going to Germany, they're going to France, they're going to Austria, they're going anywhere where they will be paid more than in Poland, when they will have better life than in Poland. The answer from the government side was, well, so let them go. Because I'm talking from this Polish perspective, because especially when government, when power has media, controls, there's no freedom of speech really, when it's still this populist narration, people will believe in almost everything in general. Because in Poland, I don't think that we had a big problem before with those things. Of course, we are facing many problems, but the truth is that Law and Justice Party won in 2015 because previous government failed when it was about social services. And now our economy is ruined. And even I, a strong supporter for good social services, for public health care, and so on and so on. I am admitting it. They're just ruined our economy. But still, people will vote for them because of propaganda. So I believe that one of the biggest tasks is to face this propaganda.
Just a remark, I wasn't implying that this approach would just solve all the problem. I'm just saying that it is a lot worse when the government actually thinks that everybody's going to stay because of some emotional loyalty issue or value that people have. So they know that no matter what they do, the people are just going to keep taking it. And those politicians, they can say all they want that they don't care, and you might as well just leave. But when those doctors and nurses leave, and when those company owners and tech people leave and also take their tax residency with them, then at some point they don't want to lose this tax money, and they don't want to lose the doctors. They're the ones who are going to have to deal with the deficit of doctors and nurses in the country. And one of the things authoritarian regimes love the most is money. So even if they say that you might as well just go, they're just pretending to not care, of course, in order to keep getting the votes. What I was saying is that it is better to make it clear that you would leave, that you wouldn't hesitate to leave if, let's say, if the offer of this company called the government of this country doesn't seem to be very beneficial for you anymore, then you're going to someone with a better offer. It's a lot better to have a situation where it's at least it's more like you have a say as a citizen, rather than the situation where they're completely free, they feel completely free to do whatever they want to you because they know you're not going to leave.
There's a fundamental problem with this approach. That is, you see, the central characteristics of populist propaganda is those doctors, engineers, professors, judges, tech people, they're elites. Their entire, like, you look into any country where this far right movement is increasing, they have this, like, they are pitching the country against elitism. And this is exactly, you play into their hands. This is exactly what they're going to use. Okay, these are the elite class, the privileged class, and they want to hold us, and they want to, like, ransom us, and we are not going to do it. Okay, so they would be playing strongman. In that case, we are protecting the country. We are the strongmen, and underprivileged people are, people who comes from lesser financial background. They tend to like strongmen, and in every country, people who has lesser financial capacity, it's the biggest margin. So that's not going to help. Okay, this is exactly elitism they talk about. The best approach is that I am staying in this country. This is my home. I'm not going anywhere. I am right, and you're going to give me my right. No matter how many people says I am wrong, what is right, or how many people voted for you, what's right is right.
I do agree with your approach as well. I would just like to say that in Turkey, in Turkey, it's a lot more extreme right now. So it's like a few steps further. At first, Erdogan was saying, oh, those doctors want to go, let them leave. Those people who contribute to the economy are leaving, let them leave. But at first it did work, but now the economy has completely collapsed, and now things are changing. The people from the lowest economic classes are the ones who scream on the streets that they regret ever voting for him. So it is it is a short win for them. So I'm saying this in the perspective of a country that has got even, like further in the steps towards dictatorship, which, by the way, in a week from today, there are general elections in Turkey. Let's see what happens.
I want to just add one thing, because I basically agree with Tonoi, because I believe that that it's very, as I said before, it's very easy to turn that problem, lack of doctors or lack of teachers, because in Poland we are also facing this problem, into some anti-intellectual propaganda, because right-wing populists love to play anti-intellectuals, right? So I think, especially in Poland, of course, I'm referring to Poland. We are in European Union, so we got a lot of European funds. So the government doesn't really need the taxpayers' money until they have European funds. So they can say, oh, let's doctors go. And also in Poland, especially when you're a young doctor, you're not paid well, let's say. So there is no big contribution for them into taxes, let's say, right? And this approach, though I understand your point, I find it a little bit problematic, because when the people who are agreeing with the government will say, it will be worse than now, I think, even, because there will be.
I'm not in favor of leaving, actually. I'm not saying that I'm in favor of actually leaving.
Only threaten that you will, right?
Yeah, it's.
I understand you will.
Yeah, so they should know that if they get you too, if they push your limits, you would not hesitate to leave. I'm basically saying that it's better than the approach where they know you're going to stay no matter what, and keep paying them the taxes, and keep and at some point you're just going to protest a little bit, but at some point you're going to get tired and just obey.
No, yeah. The problem is how to make it credible that people will believe that you're going to do something, not just threaten. Make the government believe that you're going to do an action, not necessarily live in the place, but do something, and not just threaten. Make it believable.
This is what they hope for. There was actually this piece in one of the political committee shows in Israel at the beginning of this new government cabinet. There was this kind of song, and they were saying, "What did the seculars do? What did the seculars do? Oh, they protest and protest until they get tired." You're probably wrong with the Hebrew version of it.
Quinn wanted to add something. I want to give her the chance.
Yeah. So actually, it's become 2 points. So the first is about the funding of religious institutions. Well, we know that in Israel, a lot of institutions or students in religious institutions are getting funded. But we saw the budget, the proposed budget this evening, and we see there that there are much more increased budget for religious institutions. There's 285 million shekels for the authority of Jewish identity. That's promoted by Avi-Maoz, the MK. And from what we see in their side of Mifleget Nav, the party, the non-party, is that they intended to be a fourth branch of government which is the rabbinate. So definitely we see funding of religious institutions, and this is from the money that all Israeli citizens pay, whether they're Jews or not, whether they're religious or not. That was the first point that I wanted to say. And about leaving, I think that Celine is correct about the credibility of the threat. When at the beginning of the protests, we had major companies or major Israeli startups stating that they will take their money out, they will take their tax money out. The government blinked. They got stressed. And this was effective for its time. I'm not sure that actually leaving will help, because then we're passing the point of no return if we do that. The Israel economy will take so many years to reconstruct. But and I think no one wants to see that. But the threat was credible, and it did make a change. Personally, I can say that I was a week in Spain when the police started using force, and actually I saw on the news a good friend of mine getting arrested, and I was so frustrated by it that all I wanted to do, and that's what Tanai said, was to get back to Israel as soon as possible and be there in the streets. And I canceled 2 flights to be here in Israel and to keep the fight. So I think that we still have to keep fighting. And we didn't see the last word of it. We're still fighting. There's still chances to stop this. I've said this before. So we must keep fighting. But and of course, I won't judge anyone who does want to leave. That's probably the logical thing to do in this situation. But as far as the protests go, we have to stay here.
Okay, I want to raise the point that we passed the 2 hours that we decided to have this conversation. People are still intrigued and want to stay and ask questions. So it's really up to you if you are willing to stay or not. There was also some people that called me, talked to me on the WhatsApp, and I said it was so interesting. They wanted it to continue, maybe have another session. It really is intriguing. It's so interesting. I'm amazed from all of you. It's amazing. It's really, I don't have words even to describe how fulfilling it is for me. And so if you want to go, feel free. If you want to stay, it's also okay. Whatever you'd like to do. And we can try to go over some of the questions that came up in the question and answer tab. Gasper wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you. Just to have some practical ideas. I mean, if you look at the evolution of illiberalism, we saw that, for example, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the governing principle was to not let people leave, right? And they went to extreme lengths. There was a minefield in Hungary at the Iron Curtain. A number of people died in Berlin at the Berlin Wall. The idea was to keep people in. And the innovation of illiberalism nowadays is to let people go, because it basically lets the steam off, right? So basically the most angry and the most educated people, which is usually the same group of people, they're allowed to leave. So basically they decrease the internal tension and pressure in a way. It's in a way ingenious, because I mean, it does show a complete disregard for a country's future, because if the most intellectual people leave, a country doesn't have a sustainable future. But apparently they don't think that far ahead. So the problem is that the remaining people who are in the country, who are very dedicated, become even more marginalized, and they are becoming easier targets, because the fewer there are, the easier it is to have a campaign against them. So of course that's a very difficult trend to counteract, I would say. And but one of the things we could do, I mean, also, like, if you look at protesting is an effective tool to some extent, especially if it goes on for a long time. But these regimes, they know that these protests will eventually tire. So in a sense, I would say that the most effective tools is actually strikes. So when you disrupt public services is one of the things that actually has an effect to some extent. Of course, the governments can criminalize this and lead to arrest, detainment, and other negative consequences. But nonetheless, one of the things that works actually is disruption of public services. Of course, I'm very much in support of non-violent measures, so I wouldn't suggest violence for anything. But in terms of non-violent measures, protesting is just, I would say, the baseline of what people can do. So blocking public institutions, taking over public institutions, building blockades, calling your representatives, blocking your representatives' houses, private properties, is all fair game, I would say, because private property has no human right. So I would say one of the things people can do, even in smaller groups, is to stop public services. And if public services stop, then people are actually, even the passive majority gets to think about that something is fundamentally wrong. Like, one of the things with the school system, which is usually the subject of protests in Hungary, is that until the schools take children in as a daycare facility, so not as an educational institutions, but basically a place where people can leave their children while they go to work, then people won't really rebel, because, well, the school's main purpose is not education for them, but somewhere to just, pass the kids along. But if the teachers are on strike, and on an actual strike, which is banned in Hungary, teachers are not allowed to strike meaningfully. So if there actually is nobody in the school and you cannot leave your children there, then the parents have to think like, yes, the education system actually has collapsed because I cannot put my children in a building. So I'm just trying to illustrate these kinds of things. And of course, the governments can still come up with creative ways of how to block that. But I would say that there's a wide range of literature on nonviolent civil disobedience that we could employ. And I encourage everybody to read more about it.
I would like to say two opposing points about this method. In one way, I do support the idea of blocking the way of the politicians of the regime, especially when it comes to properties and cars that were given to them from the taxpayers' money. So if we don't let them in the parliament, or if we block their way from the parliament to the car which we are paying for, I believe it is absolutely legitimate, because they're supposed to be serving us, the people, not vice versa. On the other hand, like you said, it's going to make some people wake up realizing that things are horribly wrong. On the other hand, well, a populist regime would just blame you. They would just say, see, it's because of those anarchists or terrorists that our school system and our public services are destructed. So I don't think there's just one way to, like, it's not one way or one golden solution to get rid of dictatorship. I think the only thing we can do is to keep fighting. Like, whenever they come up with something new, we have to fight with that too. It's the Turks actually call it, they have a phrase for that. It's called a war of tiredness. It's all about who tires who first. So I think we can all see that there's no one golden rule for that. Maybe this is why it's so difficult.
I would like to add this point, since we are talking about a disruption of public property. So, okay, we, like every country, has different characteristics. When our fight for democracy happened in Bangladesh, we were really violent, and that's really, I do not think that fits into Israeli perspective. But you can actually disrupt the port activities. That's the backbone of economy, and if you can, like, somehow organize protest in the ports, that probably work. They'll look into it.
Okay, guys.
If I can only one thing about this non-violent resistant. My thought was, among us, I suppose, among people who are supporting opposition of some sort in Israel, as well as in Poland or in Hungary, or in any country, there are policemen, there are soldiers. I know law in Israel is a little bit different than in Poland, but for example, policemen, they can just stop doing their job. They can resist in that way. For example, I believe that everyone has to find their own way to resist. Because really the government as such is what, few hundreds people, perhaps few thousand in a party, but it's mostly about this whole state apparatus. And if this state apparatus will turn against the government, then they will have a problem.
I have to tell you something about Israel, that police forces in different cities behave differently. When we protest in Tel Aviv, which is the most liberal city in Israel, I feel like the police forces are actually supporting us. In most of there were many cases where they told us that we will tell you to leave, but you're going to stay. So stuff like that. But it's not the same in other cities. I was able to confront police forces in other cities, never mind the name, that we actually came to shouting and almost violent. We didn't get to it, but it was very, very close to it. So it's even convincing police forces to fight with you. Sometimes it can be helpful, sometimes it's not. It's part of the struggle to convince them to support you. Okay, guys, there are many questions, and let's surprise the people around that we did a very short question on the WhatsApp, and I think that we are heading to another session, and I think it would be amazing if we have another one, because this was incredible. I don't have another words to describe it. It was incredible session. It was so interesting, so intriguing. And I do think that we're going to publish the recording, if it will be okay for the participants. And we are already working on having an editor that will be able to cut it into viral sketches, and that will be helpful. And let's surprise everyone and make another session. We'll talk about it and publicize it. I hope it's okay. And if someone didn't have the chance to say what he wanted to, we'll give him the chance, because every word that each one of you gave us was nothing but great. I miss the word, but it was so great. So it's amazing. So I guess in a few minutes we're going to be cut off by the technology. So let's just say thank you for everyone that participated, especially the panelists. But there are so many people behind the scene that help us, that did all the technology behind us. Ila, that you never met her, but she was with our call. She helped us in publicizing the event, in doing all the networks and writing all the advertisement and spreading them around with all the groups that are in Israel. So it's really great for all the help, and also the high-tech protest leadership that was also behind publicizing the event and giving us some technology helps that some of you didn't even notice that went on. So again, thank you everyone. It was amazing, and let's have another session. I think we can do something great and even make it regular maybe. So thank you very much. And there were many questions on the Q&A. Let's try to see if we can address them offline. So again, thank you everyone for their time and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, everyone.
And if someone has question, on the chat I send my email, so feel free to write to me, and because I know that we didn't have time to answer all your questions.
I wrote my email there as well. It's gaspar.bekes@protonmail.com. So you're very welcome to send any messages, and I will try to answer all of them. And in the Q&A, I try to answer some questions directed to me as well. But I mean, I'm not sure if I could answer them all.
And you can find me with my name and surname, Celine Cohen, on social media. I'll try to answer as many messages as I could. Thank you very much.
Tell them the truth that you can answer also in Hebrew.
Yeah, I could also answer in Hebrew if you wish.
Just, I guess, a final note. I mean, I think we kind of see the trends of how this illiberal regimes are employing the same thing. So I would say that a good idea would be to start working on a liberal manifesto, I would say, against illiberalism, but kind of a modern version, you know, where we would all add our perspectives and experiences, and something that would be straightforward and easily built upon, and would orient a lot of people. And of course, perhaps have a session on different methods of civil disobedience that can be employed in illiberal contexts.
So, sounds great.
I think that would be great to establish some few, because there today were so many topics on the on the table that probably we should have like several webinars to talk about them all fully.
Great. Okay, thank you everyone. I'm going to press the leave button. And again, thank you. It was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Best to everyone.
To freedom and democracy.
Freedom and democracy.
Right on. I'm in democracy.
Well, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
End it.
Liberty, equality, and brotherhood, I would say.
And sisterhood.
And sisterhood, of course, Laura.
Let's have some, and let's add some secular values as well.
Oh, it's a great French Revolution, so it's secular as such.
Yeah.
We talk about secular So the
Yeah, I think secularity is kind of, you know,
Also the
like
ones
within
what's happening.
democracy.
Well,
There's
You
no such
do
thing
a
as a
cup of tea,
chronological democracy.
Christian.
You would think it's included, but I mean, it's not necessarily straightforward. I don't think there is a completely secular country in the world. I don't think France is completely secular.
Yeah, I agree that France is not, but I believe that in Europe it's probably except of Czech
The
Republic.
recording has stopped.
They're
Czech Republic
probably
is
the
a good
most.
example, but I would say like if we look at like there is the Humanist International Freedom of Thought